Friends, enemies, and the indifferent, welcome to the third episode of Night of the Black Sun podcast with myself, Rob the Baron von Aphid Miller, to give me my full title. This week, or this episode, I got the great pleasure to meet up again with an old friend from way back in the day, Mr. Pete Lyons, aka Lippy, aka Captain Caveman to those of us in the know. The founder and guitarist with the anarcho-punk band, I guess you would say, Antisect. So, how are you doing, Pete?
I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Grand. And how's life in where you're somewhere near London, aren't you?
I'm on the outskirts of London in a place called Welling, not to be confused with Welling Garden City.
Okay, and is that a long way from Daventry?
Yeah, it's a million miles from Daventry in a lot of ways.
Okay, yeah. Pete, tell us about growing up in Daventry, Northamptonshire in the 70s and 80s. What was it like there?
Rubbish.
Rubbish.
It was it was all right. It was a small provincial town, very conservative. I think it actually had a Lib Dem or Liberal council, but it was very conservative. Pretty run of the mill, really.
Were you like the only punks in the village guys there, or what was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird. I mean, how I sort of got into it was I was actually my parents separated when I was about sort of 13, 14, and I was down in London visiting my dad.
Right.
And we were sitting there in his little bedsit kind of place, and the Pistols' Bill Grundy interview came on.
Oh wow! Right. And
so that was my kind of.
You kicked the tally.
No, well, yeah. That was kind of my introduction. I mean, I'd heard about sort of like this punk rock thing, and kind of witnessing that kind of made me go, fuck me, I like this. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I quite like it.
Right.
And I sort of went back to Daventry and went into school at the time, and a few other people had kind of heard about it. And I'm sure it's like similar to yourself. There's like very small kind of group of people that are sort of into that sort of weird kind of youthful rebellion type shenanigans.
Yeah.
And there was about probably maybe 5 or 6 of us in the town that kind of got it. And we sort of ended up hanging out together, as you do. And we formed a band.
What was the band first called? Was it always Antisect or was it someone else?
No, it was a different band. It wasn't Antisect. It was a band called Xylem, which was very different. Really kind of straight ahead, sort of like punk rock type stuff. We did a lot of cover versions. It was pretty chaotic. We only did about maybe 3 or 4 gigs, local gigs, but they were all quite eventful in their own way.
But had you trained as musicians in any way, or were you just picked something up and went, "Oh, we'll do this"?
No, we hadn't trained at all. I mean, that was part of the romance of it, really, is that the whole kind of vibe that turned me on to punk was that anyone can have a go at doing this shit.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm anyone, I'll have a go at doing this shit.
Yeah, we kind of literally with the old sniffing glue thing. Here's 3 chords, go form a band. So many people did, didn't they?
Yeah, and it was excellent. I mean, a lot of it was awful, and a lot of stuff that I did sort of early on was awful. I'm sure some people will say it's the same nowadays, but it was you just kind of like, I mean, I tuned my guitar to a chord originally, so I just put one finger across the fretboard and just go up and down, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a few more people did stuff like that, but it was fun. It's the fact that you made this ridiculous noise and you were doing it with your mates. It was really kind of, it was inspirational, and it was a good laugh as well.
I suppose it was really sort of an empowering time for us, being able to do this thing, and almost immediately you could get on stage, couldn't you, at your local youth club or village hall or town hall or whatever, and kind of get an audience of your as you say, your 5 or 6 friends and anyone else you could get into it at the time.
Yeah, it was good in that respect. I mean, most people that that I went to school with and sort of knew outside of school just didn't really understand it. They didn't know what the hell was going on. So it was a very small circle. And we lived close to Northampton, about 10, 12 miles from Northampton. So as time went on, we gradually got to know people over there and widened the circle, and on it went from there, really, you know.
Did you
But it
decide?
was,
Did you decide to like pick it up and go, "We're going to do this. This is going to be the your kind of focus, your main focus," or did you have to supplement that with working or all that kind of stuff at the time, or were you on the dole?
well, at the time, I had this really crap job of digging holes.
Mm. What kind of holes?
Uh, I'd My mum had got me this job working with a local firm of builders. We ended up in somewhere like going off to Milton Keynes or somewhere like that every morning.
Yeah.
And basically, because I was the youngster, it was kind of like, okay, we'll give him all the shit jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent about 2 or 3 months digging trenches
Get
before
you
I
fit,
kind
though,
of
eh?
thought, well, yeah, not in a way I'd like to be.
Yeah.
And and that was enough for me. I just thought, fuck that, I'm not doing that. I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a few other things coincided with that, and I just thought, this isn't the life for me. And it wasn't a conscious decision to try and make a living out of being in a band or anything like that. And I mean, I probably never have really.
I don't think
But
anybody did with that. They didn't have that intention. You just go
no,
do this for as long as you can get away with it, really, wouldn't it?
yeah, it was just sort of going out there and seeing where it would take you.
Mm.
And some of us were lucky. We sort of got a result out of it. And once you do start sort of getting out and about, you kind of get a thirst for it, and then you continue on.
Yeah,
It
often
was
self-financed though. That's a problem, isn't it?
yeah, but
Mm.
you figure out how to do it. If there's a
Mm.
few of you, you can generally manage it.
And did you move into the big city or anything like that en masse, or how did life proceed from there?
Well, the first port of call was moving to Northampton. That was
Mhm.
kind of the big city, sort of locally.
Yeah,
Um, and then sort of after a while, I started. We did a few tours with Dirt,
yeah,
uh, sort of an anarcho sort of band, and we kind of got on quite well with them, and started spending more time in London, and eventually just it kind of segued into this thing where, well, I'm in London more than I'm in Northampton. I may as well move to London.
yeah.
So me and John, the bass player at the time, both moved down there, and I've been kind of in that area ever since, really.
You guys toured with the Discharge at one point. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the first kind of like break, I suppose we got. Pete, our drummer, kind of knew them. He used to go to a lot of their gigs, and he kind of got us on the bill for like the Hear Nothing tour, the sort of first major Discharge tour kind of thing. We did about like six or seven gigs or something, but it was good, and it was a lot of exposure.
Yeah,
And
I'd imagine so. It must have been big crowds coming to that at that point.
yeah, it kind of kicked on from there, really. We were kind of lucky in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Polsky, what's he doing these days?
I don't know. I don't really hear from anybody
Oh,
of
really?
that time at all. No, no,
Because
no,
I saw
completely.
him on Facebook when I was still doing that as a person, an entity back several years ago. I thought he was over in Scandinavia or something like that. He's posting lovely pictures,
Yeah, I
photography and
think he's
stuff.
out there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So did you guys just like split to the four winds after what's it, 1987? I think you pretty much threw in the towel just the same time as we did.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird. I mean, we sort of we moved to London. Sort of half the reason for it was because everything seemed to be going on there, and we just thought, well, we were spending more time there, and I just thought, well, let's go down here and and see what we can do. If
Hmm,
we can do what we did in Daventry, then surely we can do a bit more in London.
sure.
But as it kind of turned out, I think the whole kind of scene was sort of developing and changing, and it got a bit kind of there was like kind of two sides to it because we were a sort of political band. It was on the one side you had the kind of the vegan police, anarcho police side, and
Hmm,
on the other side you had this kind of more nihilistic kind of element.
yeah,
And we didn't really fit in, sort of, in any of it really. We were kind of, we were into like enjoying ourselves, and we were a bit druggy and whatever,
hmm,
and it didn't really seem to. But at the same time, we were kind of wanted to say something that we thought was relevant.
Yeah.
So, we sort of crossed over, I suppose, in little bits of both of those kind of camps, but we never really felt we belonged in either of them, if you know what I mean.
I think that was something that drew Amebix and Antisect together as sort of pal bands, really, as well. This sort of
I think so.
We had this sort of shared interest in metal music and like the forbidden side of things, because obviously, like you're saying, the regimented attitude of the kind of like vegan and the punk police and things like that was a bit too much. And then you had the other side, which was Disorder Chaos UK, just getting drunk and achieving nothing at all, not really having any sort of message or really just kind of nihilistic childishness, So I think both of us as bands had a sort of a fairly serious side to us that we were trying to manifest. For me, watching Antisect was, again, it's one of those sort of visceral experiences. It's like I remember the first time, kind of, it took a few songs and then you suddenly realize there's this big fat sound coming out and it's like really heavy. And I enjoy that. It's kind of like when I'm not a fan of death metal or black metal rather, but you kind of get it when it comes up to the big riff, and it felt like that sort of experience with Antisect, and it was like going, yeah, these guys on the same kind of wavelength,
Well, we were always into kind of rock music anyway before we got into punk, as individually at least anyway, so it was like, well, I don't really like that kind of trebly, bloody, horrible tinny nonsense.
Yeah, the Southern Studios sound.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I kind of mentioned
a battle with them when we were doing the album. Colin, God bless him, he was great, but he really wanted to push it more to that kind of the sound that was, prevalent there at the time, and it wasn't really our bag, so it was a bit of a battle. But
we had the same experience, and it was the word came down from the top, which was Crass, basically, via John Loder, saying that they wanted to thin down the guitar sound, and we were going, we want to get your heavy metal pedal and get that thing going, but there was a concerted effort to have everything within the stable, wasn't there? Like it all had to have that kind of like brand identity, which I kind of got. You could say, you could easily recognize anything that had come out of Southern or Spiderleg, really. But that homogeneity of sound was quite annoying because it's like we really wanted to achieve something we had in our head, but we didn't seem to have the means of doing it,
Well, the thing is that, wasn't it supposed to be about expressing your individuality?
we don't
and
like
to be homogenized like that was like kind of, oh, hang on, what's going on here? It didn't feel appropriate.
Well, you realize at that point you're part of a sort of conveyor belt. Now, while saying that, I've also got to express, I think most of us were very grateful for the privilege of being allowed to kind of get away with it for so long and put out music, and you get the support and all that kind of stuff. But at the top, in the sort of southern realms and with Kraus and stuff like that, they very much had a brand thing going, and they had the vision for that, which was utilizing the energy of people like ourselves to keep their brand label going, and good for them. I mean, they made an empire out of that. But when it came back to me going after the old Amebix recordings from Southern, they were very, very reluctant to give anything up at all. And it's like, well, hang on a second, we paid for all of that stuff, we produced the artwork, we paid for all the recordings, and it's like it's actually ours. So they had no mind.
Well, I mean, we had no contract or anything like that. So there was nothing to point to suggest, well, isn't this the case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
No, we were like really green and naive as well.
Yeah.
And like you say, we were really appreciative of being given the opportunity to do something to start with,
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think there would have been anybody else that would have taken on some of us in the raw state we were back at the time, but they kind of made a thing of it, particularly with the Bullshit Detector and series and stuff like that, where you could do anything on a C60, C90 tape, and it would find an audience.
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, there were some really interesting, weird little nuggets that came out of all of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of all different types of music and different kind of spheres of stuff.
That's right. I
But
mean, you had some pretty zany stuff, didn't you? Andy T and Zounds and this kind of stuff as well. So,
yeah,
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 some odd bits. I mean, I guess it was quite an exciting time, really, because there was a limited field of music back then, wasn't there? It's like you'd look in the alternative charts, the indie charts back then, and you know all the bands that you knew would be in there whenever they'd release something. So a very small pool to draw from.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It
Mm.
was. I mean, it was. Yeah, it was an exciting time. It was really kind of an optimistic time as well, considering what else was going on around. You know,
Yeah,
there's kind of like feeling that you did have a little bit of power somewhere to change something or other.
yeah,
Um, but as it developed, like you say, it did get a bit weird, and going back to the question about the band sort of splitting, it was kind of half to do with the way that the scene had kind of gone. It did, since the whole Thatcher era, and we had the things like the Battle of the Beanfield and all this kind of stuff, and it was all getting quite serious. I
mm.
think a lot of people kind of went a different way from that. It was like, oh fuck this, I'm just going to get out of my head.
Yeah,
They couldn't see a path through it, and they kind of took that route. Um, and as that became more prevalent to us, it was like, well, we'd be doing gigs and we'd be trying to say something, but you were acutely aware that nobody was really listening to what you were singing about or saying.
mm.
It was more the event of like everyone getting together, getting pissed, having a good time, which is fine. But there was another element to it that was equally as important, I think.
Mm.
And over time, it just wore us down. And the fact that we were kind of squatting in London, some of us were on the road traveling. It just became ridiculous trying to hold the whole thing together.
I noticed that from our sort of angle down in the West Country, same thing. A lot of the sort of punky types drifted over toward the convoy and the traveling sort of
Yeah,
culture, and got involved in the sort of the almost endless circuit of free festivals. Uh,
yeah,
and then other ones got involved heavily in drug culture. So you got the smack came into the cities, and a lot of people, you just lost a lot of friends. Everything declined, went downhill. The original impetus kind of seemed to run out of steam, and like you
yeah,
say, you're shouting about something and you don't quite know how to articulate it properly, but you're trying to keep people keep people infused and also keep them focused as well. And it just seemed impossible. It seemed like it's like the halcyon days had already gone, hadn't they?
yeah. That's definitely what it felt like. I mean, some of the sort of gigs that we did, I'm sure similar to yourselves, they just turned into ridiculous kind of affairs. I mean, kind of funny to look back on it, but at the time, it was kind of really sort of frustrating in parts.
Yeah,
Uh,
it just you're just recycling the same kind of scene all the time. It's like being inside trapped inside one of those dreams you can't quite get out of. You don't know whether you're awake or asleep.
yeah,
Felt
yeah,
like that at times, because it's like, what's happening here? Well, actually, nothing's happening at all. Nothing.
yeah,
Nothing. There was no consequence of anything that anybody had said or anything that anybody had done in the real world. It was just you're just preaching to a very increasingly diminishing audience,
yeah,
um,
exactly.
who don't do anything with it. And coming back, probably like yourself, having come back into that field all those many years later, it's like, wow, it was unrecognizable in some ways how another kind of like mentality had taken over, a very rigorous kind of authoritarian kind of dictating kind of stuff, which had taken over from that original impulse that we had, perhaps.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting coming back into it. I mean, I sort of kind of thought, oh, it's done, it's done. I'm not going to revisit anything like that. And we got sort of hassled by this guy, and over and over and over, and eventually we kind of relented. And I sort of like got back into it and contacted a few people, but I didn't really know what to expect. I suppose I had no idea, because I'd been sort of away from the scene for quite a few years. Um, got involved in my own kind of little world, doing my own kind of thing, and as time went by, I drifted further and further away from it. So to come back and revisit it it was a bit like, well, I need to kind of learn where people are at now. Is there an audience there? What is the audience about?
Mm.
What's kind of going on? And it was strange because in a lot of ways I kind of thought that very little had changed,
Okay.
in you kind of think, well, it was probably 20 odd years since we'd played before, but in some respects it was like no time had passed at all. um I kind of expect things to develop.
Mm.
I I kind of expect, if you get into something, then you explore it and you take it one step at a time, and you kind of move on, and you reach a few conclusions, and that sends you this way or that. But it seemed to me that things hadn't really developed very much. And I don't know if that's just me being an outsider and a grumpy old man looking in,
I don't.
or
I think I'd agree with you. Generally speaking, I think what had happened in the meantime, in the interim, was there's a sort of a fetishization and a formalization of a particular epoch, a particular period in time. It's as though somebody
yeah,
had been studying videos and fanzines from a small sort of Overton window of the early 80s, and they wanted to regenerate that. It's almost like this the Japanese obsession with some of the punk bands, where you knew damn well that you could never produce the same kind of quirky guitar solo ever again, but they would have written it down so that anybody else could. It's
yeah,
encapsulating something, but the problem with that is you don't have any of the original magic. All you have is a book of rules. You have the book of punk rock. This is how you dress. This is what you listen to. This is these are all the criteria, but the magic of spontaneity just simply isn't there. So, we ended up, in a sense, revisiting that and going, well, it's kind of like the Teddy Boys were for us when we were kids, looking at them and going, well, they're really trapped in a particular period, aren't they?
yeah. I think that's really true.
Mm.
It's it's a weird one. I mean, we've kind of made contact with a few old heads, that were around back in the day, and I found that, in amongst them, that was the prevailing attitude. It was, you get people sort of posting stuff, tracks on the internet from like 20 odd years ago. You kind of think, well,
Mm.
what's new,
Yeah, yeah. What
you
what
know,
happened in the interim? Yeah, and I mean, for me, I don't know about for yourself, but I'd found the sort of the political politicization of it really quite disturbing. In that, if anybody had started waving around a hammer and sickle in gigs in the 80s, you would have shown them the door. Whereas now it seems to be almost de rigueur. It's like part and parcel of the whole package itself, and it's like, how did it get like that? I mean, Crass we're quite explicit about this sort of stuff. Don't get involved in this right or left paradigm thing, really.
yeah. I think, well, people have a quite a, not to be disparaging, but people have quite a limited view on the world. They kind of, most people kind of accept what's given to them. So if
Mm.
you've got a choice between this, or this, you don't necessarily have the kind of wherewithal to look at that and say, well, surely it's not just those three things. There's a whole multitude of possibilities out there. But it's easier for people to look at it like that, and that's when things become dogmatized. I think when you kind of, when you restrict your kind of vision to what's immediately in front of you.
Yeah, and also kind of um, just for the sake of agreement, really, between groups of people too. The fact that nobody wants to argue or debate anything is just a case of yeah, we agree with this particular dogmatic point of view. So, I mean, so for you, how would you encapsulate? What was the message of Antisect?
Well, I mean, there were obvious things that we kind of felt strongly about that were part of, the original scene anyway. I mean, we weren't all sort of vegetarian, but we all kind of like had those kind of sympathies.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of anti kind of establishment, anti-government kind of stance was there.
Mm-hmm.
But as well as that, I mean, the thing is for me is that once you start going down a certain kind of route, you look at the things that link to it, and if you're of the opinion that, for example, in those days, the government is bad, blah 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 blah. Well, then you try and work out the reasons why, and you start joining the dots, and that opens you up to a much wider outlook. And I found that a lot of folks, not to be negative about it, but a lot of the folks had quite a sort of narrow view. I mean, I was sort of quite involved in the animal rights thing for a few years, kind of like activism and stuff. And a lot of the people that I met through that movement were solely into that. And they didn't seem to want, they didn't either see or they didn't want to see the links with the ethics involved in that, how that would be transferable to a wider view on the world and how you should live it or how you could live it,
Yeah.
And I found that really kind of puzzling. And I think the same thing is probably prevalent in the scene as it was, It's a kind of it's almost like a peer group thing. It becomes like a bit like a peer group thing, I think, where there's safety in numbers, and therefore you don't really want to rock the boat because then you'll lose all your mates.
Do you think, I mean, I reflecting upon what you're saying there, is like, do you think that we were sort of trying to create our own rites of passage because we didn't really have any other ones that were offered from society generally as we saw it at the time?
Well, probably without realizing it, yeah. I mean, I've always said, we just made it all up as we went along. We had limited experience of like the sort of big wide world, if you like. And so everything, in the early days anyway, everything was kind of new and you hadn't experienced it before. So you found your own way through it, and, not everything was in this straight line all the time,
So did Antisect have a kind of a kind of spiritual, for want of a better term, a kind of spiritual aspect to it? In the sense, I guess like we'd look at some of the bands around Bristol, Bath, and stuff like that. With obviously Amoebics and other folk that kind of like taking on board some of the, I guess, more pagan imagery and things like that.
We weren't really so inclined to be like that, I don't think. It was for us, or for me anyway, it was more sort of dealing with the sort of immediate constructs of, how society's built. It's funny you say about that area, because there did seem to be like quite a lot of people around there. Maybe it's because of where it was, that were more into sort of like, the sort of pagan thing and, that side of things, and more kind of like, I suppose you call it spiritual maybe, but
yeah, well, I hate that word, don't you? It's like, country punk's kind of like a bit more connected with the landscape and things, I guess.
So,
yeah. So I mean, I fondly remember yourself and Polsky coming down and visiting us in Radstock, just outside Bath, and I think you were bike couriers at the time, so you're on motorcycles. I think one of you had a GS 550, or you might have actually been two up on a bike. I can't remember which way around it was, but that was cool because it's like it was an extension of our kind of like our sort of quest for individuality, and as I say, our sort of like our own rites of passage, that some of us were gravitating toward motorcycles and going, well, this is an excellent expression of that impulse for freedom as well, wasn't it?
Well, it was. I mean, for me, it was. I couldn't afford a car, and a bike was exactly that. It was like, right, this is something that I can go anywhere on, anytime I want. That's what it meant to me. And then, obviously, the more I got into them, the more I started getting the aesthetics of them, and I like that, I don't like that, and all the rest of it as you move on.
So when did you start riding?
I've faffed around on crappy Gilera and Gorelli 50cc mopeds.
Yeah. Brilliant. Not the Fantic Caballero. You remember that one? The Fantic Chopper.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't have one of those.
There's some bad stuff around in the 70s.
Yeah.
But
I went through quite a few Japanese bikes when I was couriering. Some good, some bad.
Do you ever bin any of them at all, or no?
Ever what?
Did you ever bin any of them? Did you ever come off them at all in the
Oh,
courier? Because I know,
loads,
I mean, life
loads.
expectancy for a courier in London in the 80s was down in the months, I think, wasn't
Well, I did it for 7 years,
it? Ooh,
and I probably had more catastrophes in the first 6 months than I did in the next few years after that. You
yes,
develop this kind of like, sixth sense as you go along. And you
yeah,
realize that you haven't got to go like at 90 miles an hour everywhere. It's more that, you just know the routes. So you
yeah,
don't
and
have to
also
go
this thing
flat
about
out.
knowing damn well that the person in front is going to do something stupid, so he's always anticipating that. I find,
Yeah,
um,
you have to think like that all the time, and always have an escape route in front of you as
yeah.
well.
So, what are you riding these days?
These days, I've got an old 2000 Harley twin cam. It's a sort of weird bobber chopper hybrid kind of thing that I've hacked about to bits.
Is that an Evo? Is it?
It's a twin cam. I had an Evo and I sold it actually about 6 months ago.
Oh, right.
95 Evo.
Twin cam.
So
Hmm.
this is a development from that, which is not as quite as nice a motor, but it's quite reliable.
Mm-hmm. What was it that one that they had, which is kind of like very futuristic, the Harley. I can't remember the name of
Oh,
it
the
now.
V Rod.
The V Rod, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, they were supposed to actually
gorgeous.
handle properly, and it's like Harleys don't handle. I mean, I had that. I had one for 7, 8 years or so, something like that. Brakes don't work. They don't handle, but there's still something quite charming about them, isn't there?
Well, you do have to mess around with them. I
Mm,
mean, as stock, they're pretty boring and pretty crap, really. But what kind of how I gravitated towards them is that you can fix them yourself.
yeah,
If something goes wrong, you only need a few spanners and you can actually do it.
yeah.
I mean,
Two
modern
pots and a
Harleys now,
carburetor.
you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean everything now's got the ECUs and all this
Yeah.
fine tuning like. And as I say, you just need a carburetor and you need two pots going up and down. Like on my old Triumph, it's like every weekend go around and just tighten things up again because you're chasing that oil leak around from the rockers all the way down the cylinders. And it's like, oh, okay, if you can make it as small as possible, but you can never actually get rid of the leak.
Well, thankfully, mine's pretty leak free.
Mm.
But you do have to glue everything on it every once in a while.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah, well, I mean, it's so you're getting out and riding, and do you do any sort of big touring or anything like that at all, or no?
I haven't for a while. No, I mean, it's sort of mainly just sort of it's a recreational thing for me now. I mean, the sort of the whole couriering thing kind of sapped a bit of the enjoyment out of it for me. It's like, you do that 5 days a week and you don't really want to go anywhere on a weekend because you're just sick to death of it.
Yeah,
And so it destroyed a little bit of that element for me. But nowadays it's more of a recreational thing. I'll go for a black around the Kent countryside or the
lovely.
southeast or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's
It's
kind of
nice. I
one way
mean,
to unwind, isn't it? And chill out.
it's brilliant. I mean, the thing is with mine as well, it's a single seat, so I can never have anyone on the back.
What a shame.
Uh, and I'm sure you know yourself, it's like your little time, isn't it? In your own little headspace, and you just go and
Yeah,
that's it.
you can figure the whole world out and all its problems on the motorcycle, I reckon.
Well, sort of.
Yeah. Speaking of problems, notoriously enough, you had a heart attack on stage. Is that right?
Yeah, that was a bit weird.
Yeah.
I didn't I didn't realize that was what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing this little kind of small little festival out in Sweden, and we went on quite late, and we'd got there a couple of days before, so maybe we'd had a little shenanigans, should we say, beforehand. But I was feeling okay,
Hmm.
and yeah, the extent of it was I just felt really tired. We got like 2 or 3 songs into the set, and I just thought, oh, I'm really hot. And
Hmm.
I thought, normally you kind of expect our stage lights or whatever. That's probably something like that. It was quite a low ceiling, and we carried on, and it got to about 4 or 5 songs in, and I just thought all I could think of was just putting the guitar down and just going to lie down, and that's what I did.
Hmm. Yeah.
And everyone was kind of looking at me, like, oh, what's the matter with him? Diva, his monitor's not working.
Yeah. Right.
And I just went to the side, and there was these 2 massive bags of popcorn. like big, like sort of beanbag sized bags of popcorn, and I just lay down on them. That's all I could think of doing. And I was aware that I didn't really want to go to sleep because I wasn't really sure what was happening.
Mm.
But I had no pain or anything. It was just purely fatigue and tiredness. And as it turned out, there were two nurses from Berlin in the audience, and they came around to see me and they checked me out and they said, "We think you're having a heart attack." So they called an ambulance, which took ages to get there because we were in the middle of nowhere in the woods.
Mm.
And carted me off to hospital and put me under and gave me a stent.
Bloody hell. Must have been a bit of a shock, though, eh?
Yeah, it was. It was well, it's bound to be a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it? But it was it kind of seemed to come out of nowhere though as well. That was a sort of strange thing. I hadn't been feeling weird or anything like that. And as I say, there was no pain or anything. I chatted to the consultant in the hospital, and I sort of mentioned this to him. He said, "Oh, that's all the pain thing and everyone clutching their chest. That's what we call the Hollywood heart attack."
Yeah.
Most heart attacks aren't like that. Most heart attacks happen when people don't even realize that's what's going on, which is obviously what happened to me. But
Yeah,
was,
well, I'm glad to have seen you you were looking well last time I saw you, and in good form and all that too. So
yeah, I feel all right.
plenty more years in the old dog yet, mate. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Pete. I mean, that's a pretty distressing story, isn't it? You've been well since, I take it, and all good with yous?
Well, I had another experience last year. I was inside for a few days in November. I had a quadruple bypass.
Mm-hmm.
I've had everything done.
Right.
So now I've got new arteries all round, and I can start all over again.
Brilliant.
No, but
Like the
yeah,
Rolling
yeah, exactly. Just like Keith Richards.
So do you feel all right though? I mean, generally speaking, you're in good shape, yeah?
Yeah, I feel fine, really. Yeah, I mean, we're just now looking at maybe doing some sort of shows either later this year or early next year, and
Cool.
sort of getting back in the swing of doing stuff like that. I kind of drifted away from music for a little while. Other things took preference, and I had to sort of kind of recuperate in my head, really.
But you did music production and studio stuff and that for a bit, didn't you?
Well, I had 20 odd years of quite a sort of biggish sort of studio in Camden. That was my kind of living, really.
Sure.
I kind of got into that, at the end of the band. I just thought, well, I'm incapable of doing anything else, and I don't really want to have a 9 to 5 job. That's just not me. So you just try and find your way through it, don't you? And that's what I settled on, and it served me quite well.
Great.
I sort of had a great time, met a lot of really interesting, inspiring people, and that eventually came to an end about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, when the whole world turned upside down, as we all know.
Yeah, and everyone went mental.
Yeah, some more mental than others.
I mean, so to round things off, really, I mean, how do you see the world today in contrast to the world which we grew up in?
Similar kind of shit show, more kind of all enveloping, I would say. I think as technology's moved on, that's enabled one or two people around the world to cast their kind of cloak over people in a wider way, I think. I know you've experienced it yourself, and I don't know if I'm kind of optimistic or not. I can't really make my mind up. Sometimes I have these chats with people and it sort of makes me feel good, and other times you're kind of aware of the mass of people out there that just do not either want to comprehend or cannot comprehend, or I don't know what it is. You kind of realize what a different point of view is up against. It's a weird feeling. It's somewhere in the middle of optimism and pessimism, I suppose.
Yeah, there was this kind of temptation to go for the black pill often, but I guess it's up to us really to keep on reinventing or keep on trying to find ways through this, because what are we going to do otherwise? It's like I want to try and find some way of giving some hope to all of us. It would be healthy for all of us to kind of talk to one another, to kind of re-inspire each other, and to reignite anything that we've got, any bit of positivity. And I'm finding even within these exchanges with people all over the place, there's a great need, but we all have part of the puzzle in a funny way too. I think that the fact that we still talk in the old sense, we still communicate, whereas everybody else, not everybody else, but a lot of other people seem to be stuck inside these consensual boxes where they have to obey certain parameters to be able to remain within the same group, whereas I still feel part of that original impetus to do your own adventure and become the master of your own destiny in some ways, and to try and share whatever little bit each of us has of that jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were lucky in some respects to be born when we were, and we kind of sort of ventured out into the world, at the time of the sort of punk explosion, really, because I think, I'm not sure, I can't say for definite, but I'm not sure if I'd be the same person that I am today without that. I've got a hunch I might be, but obviously you don't know.
Yeah.
But it's something that once it's in there, it's not going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a irrefutable part of your makeup. So it's who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's almost like a certain percentage of any sort of small town, big town, medium town community that are going to go on and do these sort of journeys, and a lot of people are just going to remain where they were. So it's your job, really, mate, isn't it?
It kind of is, but I mean, at the end of the day, you've only really got a true responsibility to yourself. You can't really, you can't demand things of people. All you can do is kind of share whatever it is that you have, in the hope that people might sort of have a look for themselves and be inspired by it. I mean, I've been inspired by so many people, and I continually am. And really, it's a case of, well, I'm not the kind of person that's like to keep your mouth shut. And if in opening my mouth, someone hears something that comes out of it that makes them go, well, I'll have a look at that then, or I'll have a look at that then that's kind of good enough for me. I mean, it's not a grand crusade or anything.
You're just a stubborn old bastard.
I am a bit, yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, I kind of I look at the youth of today, and understand that there isn't a similar kind of vehicle for them to hop on board as we had back in the day. And maybe that can be said about generations before us. Maybe other people will say, well, there wasn't this or there wasn't that. But as I gauge it by my experience around music and the music industry, and the people that came through the studio in the last kind of 20 odd years, and the prevailing kind of sort of sentiment or sensibility isn't anywhere near like that time that we shared,
Yeah, I
so in a way, I think there's an element of kind of lostness, because there's no focal point really, other than a general kind of disgruntlement with what's going on, because that's
and this sort of emphasis on being an influencer or a person of note and all that kind of stuff. It's just this, everybody wants to be somebody. But they think that it's an automatic right now, don't they? So it's like, it's there's a right to passage.
It's weird, and the way that things are being shut down left, right, and centre. The experience of the last few years, it kind of makes me more inclined to sort of double down on what I do.
Yeah,
because otherwise you're just sucked into it, aren't you? And you may as well just sort of curl up in the corner. And I'm not that kind of guy, and you're not either,
Yeah.
So
whatever it was that originally inspired us, it still seems to there's embers of that which kind of like move on to different enthusiasms, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you express things in different ways as well. I mean, you know, like we said, you know, you don't necessarily do the kind of music that you did in 1985 or whatever it was, or you might, you know, completely change direction and express yourself in terms of like, you know, other kind of, you know, creative kind of ventures or whatever. But what's inside you will always come out. You
Yeah.
know, I think it's inevitable. I mean, I know people now that I knew back in the day, for want of a better phrase, that have got nothing to do with music, but still kind of put a similar point of view across in their own medium, you know.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love bumping into people like that. I find that really inspirational, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. The
It's
more the merrier, really, where that's concerned. Eh?
yeah, definitely. And it's also, I think that you that there has developed a kind of a hardcore of people that haven't kind of succumbed to all the nonsense, you know. And my relationships with them are definitely stronger now than they ever have been. You know, the whole episode of the last kind of 3 years or so has been in a weird kind of way, sort of a bullshit detector.
Oh, too right.
And it's really kind of it's separated the wheat from the chaff. I don't want to sound disparaging, you know, to people, because you know people make their own minds up about
Well,
things. But
yeah.
the way I view it, that's kind of what's sort of happened.
I really think I really think that that's the case. I feel that too. So Pete, I'm going to kind of like wind things down now, and
All right.
I just wanted to look at the really for you personally. Do you have a sort of overall philosophy or message? What is it that you've taken from your life experience so that you can share with people and say, this is what I got. This is what made me. You know, this is encapsulates Pete Lyons' experience so far.
I'd just say don't be scared to express your individuality.
Hmm.
You know, whatever that may bring. I mean, you know, we all have a sort of moral code and our personal ethics and whatever. And, you know, one hopes that, you know, we can justify our actions. I mean, you know, I've made mistakes. You know, I haven't always done things the right way. I'll freely admit to that. But I think it's good to question what you do. It's good to explore, try and gain knowledge. Uh, but ultimately, it's good to be yourself, you know,
Hmm.
because if you do look into yourself, then 9 times out of 10, you know, that person is going to be pretty kind of a worthwhile chap or chapess to kind of knock around with. And I think there's not enough of that, really. I think try and step outside the homogeny, you know, and don't be afraid to do that. It's not always easy, but it's definitely empowering, I think, when you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the experience of like hooking up with you again after all these years has been great, and it's just again you immediately sort of like the crack is the same. You know, you
Yeah,
can
yeah, I
you can
felt
put
that. Yeah.
30, 35, 40 years in between us, and you go, oh, shit, same people, the same spirit is there, and you can immediately recognize that. And it was just a delight to have you visit this wilderness and wasteland in the north last year, and I'm hoping that we're going to get out and see each other at some point whilst we still can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd like to get up there this year if I can. We'll see how things develop. But yeah, no, it was lovely to see you as well. And after all that time, it
Yeah,
was just one of those nice experiences, you know, when you just immediately slip back into something with someone, and there's no kind of feeling each other out and all that kind of
yeah,
caper, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to ask. I would normally say choose an amoebics tune or choose a Tau cross tune, but since we have a genuine musician here before us, I would like you to choose something from the Antisect catalog and tell me why.
Right. What I will choose is the opening track from the last album, The Rising of the Lights. It's a track called Spirit Level, and it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the record, really. Um, you'd have to get to know the lyrics.
Okay.
It's difficult to describe.
Lovely. Pete Lyons, aka Lippy, aka Captain Caveman, and whatever else. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you again. Thanks for giving us your time. And hopefully some people will leave the comments and wave hello down below. Thanks, Pete, and yeah, take care, mate.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure, mate. Okay.